Hey everyone, it's BitShark, your MIA Genshin lore YouTuber. I am here today because I wanted to talk about Honkai Star Rail. Now, I've been playing this game a whole lot over the past few days, and I think at this point I have about 100 hours under my belt in the game because sleep is not a thing. And just for some context, I think right now I'm sitting at Trailblaze level 39. I've completed all the quest lines, opened all the chests, and done all the puzzles in the game. Because of this, I think I'm in a pretty decent spot to talk about things I like and things I don't like about the game and give you guys kind of the rundown on the pros and cons of the game as I see it. Also, just kind of as a side note, this video is completely unscripted and it might get a little bit rambly at times, but I'm going to try to keep it down to a minimum because I know that I do tend to be kind of a rambly person, so hopefully it's not like that in the rest of the video. But without further ado, let's just get into my thoughts on the game and impressions overall. So those of you who are new to Hoyoverse, or maybe you just heard about this game and have no idea what it is, I would describe Honkai Star Rail as an instance open world turn-based gacha RPG. I know that's a lot of words and I totally made that up, but I do truly feel like this is probably the best way to describe this game. Essentially how it plays is that there's a bunch of these different maps for you to explore with your characters, and within each map there's a bunch of enemies, NPCs, quest lines, chests, puzzles, etc. for you to mess around with. And also there's like a main story that helps you unlock each of these maps. So that's another important component of the game. And then lastly, there's other like game modes, but we'll talk about that later because I don't think they're really relevant at this point in the video. But before we move on, I just wanted to talk about something that I really liked about the game, which was the open world exploration. And basically this game works very similarly to Genshin, where there's like this open world for you to kind of explore and unlock chests and interact with different puzzles. The puzzles were actually really good in this game, and I found myself getting stumped a few times. Like I said, it's very similar to Genshin, where every region has its own kind of puzzle, so it never feels like you're doing the same puzzle over and over again, which is really, really nice. But overall, I would say the instance open world exploration was pretty good. It's very similar to Genshin, so if you played Genshin and you like exploring, I think you will like this aspect of the game as well. Another thing that I really liked was that you're able to interact with a lot of objects in the game, so it kind of built this strong sense of immersion with the world of Honkai Star Rail. Okay, so those were my thoughts on the open world, but let's talk about the combat because I think that's what really matters in the game. And I just want to say right off the bat, the combat is really good. I think the combat is challenging, it's fluid, and it's dynamic. I don't want to get into too many details over the combat because that could be a whole video in and of itself, but there's a lot that goes into the combat of the game. So it all really starts with your team building, right? Like you want to make sure you're bringing in the correct classes. You want to make sure that you have a tank, DPS, your supports, and your healers. On top of that, you want to make sure that you're bringing a good variety of elements because all the enemies in the game have a shield that needs to be broken by a specific element. And if you don't bring in the correct elements into a fight, you're going to have a really hard time beating the enemies because the shields that they have significantly reduce the amount of damage that your characters do to the enemies. So it's really, really important that you bring in a variety of different elements. I know in a lot of other gacha games, they tend to be very mono element oriented, and that's not the case with Honkai Star Rail. You really want to make sure you bring in a variety of elements so you can break the shields and land your DPS. Now, once you're actually in the combat encounter yourself, there's a lot of different things for you to manage and resources that you have to think about. So let's start off with like the turn order. So on the left-hand side of the screen, there's a bunch of icons that show the turn order of the characters and your enemies. And essentially, there are ways for you to bump up your characters in turn order or slow down the enemies using abilities to move your other characters up in the turn order. So it makes for really dynamic gameplay where you can kind of customize who goes when by using different support abilities in the game. And then on top of that, at the bottom right-hand side of the corner, there's like these 5 stars that show your skill points. These skill points enable your characters to use your abilities. So it's another resource for you to manage to make sure that you have enough skill points to be able to use your character's abilities. But how do you get the skill points? Well, you get the skill points by auto-attacking with your team. So that kind of results in this resource management situation where you want to make sure you're using certain abilities, but also recharging your skill points by auto-attacking with normal attacks with your other characters. And then lastly, there's your ultimate, and your ultimate is charged up through using auto attacks and your skill points. And once you have your ultimate charged up, you can use it at any point in the battle. So it makes for really interesting gameplay where you can like hold an ult for when a shield breaks so you can maximize your DPS, or you can hold an ult on your healer so that they can use an emergency heal to save one of your characters. All of this combined together makes for like a really interesting combat experience where there's a lot of resource management involved as well as strategizing. That being said, you don't have to manually control the combat all the time. Just say if you're farming and you don't really want to be manually inputting what a character does, you do have the option to do autoplay, and you can also double the speed of your character's movements in the combat. So those are just kind of nice quality of life features in the game. And I definitely did use these features for like the daily farming for my characters because I just didn't want to have to manually do everything. So there were a few situations where I put everything on autoplay and double the speed and then like literally just walked away to go like wash the dishes or something, and then I come back and the combat's all done. So it's really nice to have that feature in the game. Now, this wouldn't be a lore channel unless I talked about the lore, so let's talk about the story of Honkai Star Rail. Now, the game just came out a few days ago, so I don't really want to give anything away, so I'm going to try to stay super general here about the story and my thoughts on it. Overall, I'd say the story is good. It's interesting. There's a lot of factions at play in the world, and it makes the world feel a lot more interesting. I would also say that all the characters are written really well. It's very similar to Genshin, where there's a lot of character development, which makes for very compelling and interesting characters. I know that we probably want to talk about the specifics of the story, but just for the sake of this video and for some of the newer players who haven't beaten the game yet, I just don't want to give anything away, but I just want to say the story is really good and it really draws you in really quickly. I do have to say my one complaint about the story was that the beginning of the game was just a whole lot. And by that, I mean, they just kind of throw a bunch of things at you all at once. Like they throw around a bunch of these big terms like fragmentum, stellaron, and eons. And it was just a whole lot to think about when you're first starting the game. I remember when I played through the beginning, I was just super confused and I had no idea what was going on. So that's just something to keep in mind. They definitely do explain all those concepts later in the game, but they do throw a lot at you in the beginning. So those are my thoughts generally on the story. Overall, really good, highly recommend, and I'm curious to see where the future of the story goes in Honkai Star Rail. So let's talk about the gacha component to Honkai Star Rail. At this point, I don't think we need a debate on whether or not gacha games are pay to win. I think we can all generally agree that gacha games are pay to win. I think the question here is more so the degree of how pay to win Honkai Star Rail is going to be. And from my perspective, because Honkai Star Rail is a turn-based game, it's just naturally going to be way more pay to win than a game like Genshin Impact. The reason for this is that in games like Genshin Impact, which are more action combat oriented, you have ways of outskilling the enemy so that you don't get hit or that you can beat an encounter using pure skill alone. Now, I'm not saying that Honkai Star Rail doesn't involve any skill, but it's turn-based, right? So eventually you're going to get to the enemy's turn, and the more turns you take, the more likely an enemy is going to kill you. Because of that, that makes it just way more pay to win, because the best way to win in this game is to kill the enemy as quickly as possible. And the best way to do that is through the 5 stars. There's just no way around it. 5 stars will always outclass 4 stars in almost all regards. Anyways, I don't really want to dwell too long on discussing the degree of how pay to win this game is going to be. I think at the end of the day, you have to make that decision for yourself as to whether or not you're okay with playing a pay to win game. For me personally, if the gameplay is good in a game, I'll try it out and I'll play it, but as soon as it gets way too pay to win, that's when I'll stop playing. I feel like that's a healthy approach to playing games, but I think in this world of pay to win that we are currently living in, that's just something that we kind of have to accept and deal with in the gaming industry. Alright, so let's talk about another hot topic, which is the end game of Honkai Star Rail. Currently, I'm sitting at Trailblaze level 39, like I said earlier in this video, and for me, the end game content right now mainly revolves around farming for relic sets, but I do see in the long-term Simulated Universe and Forgotten Hall being the mainstays for the end game for Honkai Star Rail. Specifically, I see Simulated Universe being the more replayable end game content for the game, game. So far, I've found Simulated Universe to be a lot of fun and really engaging, and I can see it as being the content for those of us hardcore players out there. In terms of the long term for Honkai Star Rail, I'd say it's probably going to be very similar to Genshin Impact, where there are monthly patches that introduce new story, as well as an event that includes some sort of mini game. I know I probably didn't sound like too excited for the endgame, but there really isn't a lot to say. Overall, I'm like really happy with it. I especially think I will be enjoying Simulated Universe a lot. But honestly, I also think it's a little bit too early to do like an in-depth review of the endgame. We're gonna have to see what it's like 1 or 2 months down the line to get a better sense of what the endgame is actually going to be like. And I know at this point, this video is probably super long and rambly, but there were a few things I wanted to talk about that I didn't know like where to include in the video. But here are just some things that I didn't really like about the game that I'm hoping they will fix. So there's a friend list in the game, but there's no way to like message your friends, which I thought was really weird. There's also like no all chat function or ability to message other users. So hopefully in the future, Hoyoverse will add this into the game. Another thing that I found kind of annoying for me, and it's not a huge deal, but you can't jump in the game. And I know that jumping isn't like a core mechanic of Honkai Star Rail, but it felt really weird to not be able to jump in the game. And one more thing that I kind of wish was in the game, but isn't currently, is that there is no multiplayer option. I know this is meant to be more of a single player game, but I thought it would be cool to be able to like visit your friends like space stations and stuff. I don't know. Maybe it's something that they'll add in the future, but I'm hoping that there is some sort of multiplayer functionality in the future. But yeah, these are just some of my thoughts on the game. I'd say overall, I really like Honkai Star Rail. It's been a ton of fun, and I can't wait to see where they take this game in the future. Let me know what your thoughts are on the game down in the comment section below, and if you like this video, don't forget to hit the thumbs up and subscribe button, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.